because they're English speakers in the audience. So hi, everyone, and welcome to today's Researchers Desk seminar, where we have guest speaker Dr. Alf Hornborg with us, who's going to give us a talk, a lecture. My name is Esther Gubi. I'm a PhD student at the Department of Global Public Health at Karolinska Institutet. I'll be moderating today's session. And we will listen to Alf Hornborg, who is a professor in human ecology at Lund University. And you have spent many years researching and thinking and writing about global injustices and sort of the root causes behind environmental and ecological destruction. And you've recently published a new book called Kannibalernas maskerad. It's in Swedish. There's lots to read by Alf in English, for those of you who are English speakers. I read this book and I thought it was brilliant. And so I wanted to invite you, and Toya said, go ahead. And then you said yes, and I'm very happy that you did. In this book, one of the main arguments that you make is that just as economists have falsely separated the economy from the biophysical existence of the world, so does technology or engineering make us believe that technological products are separate or independent from the social relations and the unequal power structures that make their production possible. And as I was reading your book, I thought of one thing that a philosopher called Derek Jensen has said. He says that unquestioned beliefs are the real authorities of any culture. And I think this is precisely what you do in your book. You question and you critique these sort of taken for granted assumptions that are deeply problematic and cause so many problems to the planet and people. And then you also write in the introduction that what we need now to try to solve the problems that we're in is not more data, but more insight. And that's also something that we've discussed in this forum. And I definitely got more insight when I read your book. And so I'm very happy that you're here to share your thoughts and knowledge with us. So please, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Esther, and also for your wonderful introduction. And I really like the way you summarized my argument. It's perfect. You were happy. I would be happy to see you write a review of my book. You really understood my point. Okay. I realize it's going to be very difficult in 20 or 30 minutes time to summarize my argument in the book, but I'll do my best. And because I have talked about this topic so many times over the years, I realize there will be a lot of points in my argument that I simply skip out of simply forgetting to mention it. So there's plenty of time to put questions to me afterwards if you feel that I've been too quick in making a certain point or skipping some kind of fundamental definition. I want to start by saying that I am an anthropologist. I received my PhD in cultural anthropology in Uppsala in 1986. And I think that's important to keep in the back of your mind, because like Esther said, I am trying to uncover the unspoken assumptions of our own civilization. And I've always felt that it's not only the other people on the other continents who have culture. We are imbued with culture, and our whole thinking about sustainability, the economy, technology, and so on are cultural categories. And that's why I permit myself to try to unravel what the problems are, because obviously our ideas about the world are not very sustainable. They are not congruent or compatible with the biophysical requirements of the biosphere that we inhabit. And instead of just rushing ahead with our technological and economic solutions, we really need to understand our role in the biosphere. And that means shuffling around our categories somewhat. Okay, I shouldn't spend more time on introductions. I will start by trying to share screen here. I think it should work if I do this, and I've just learned how to make a slideshow out of it, I think. Yeah, okay. So this is the topic of my talk, and actually it's the subtitle of a brand new book, which I am publishing with Routledge just now, actually. It's in press. Technology as a transformation of slavery. And you'll see why I use this topic. We are used to thinking that technology is something that has replaced slavery. Now we have machines to do all the work. I'm basically suggesting that technology is what we have delegated work to, delegated inequalities to. The social inequalities that we earlier experienced through colonialism and slavery were, during the 19th century, delegated to the market and to the institution of technology. And in that way, we have come to believe that the world is politically and morally neutral in some sense. Technology is neutral. We do not really see the extent to which technology and the market are aspects of a global system of exploitation. So you realize I'm going to apply a very macro scale perspective. Here you see a macro scale perspective on the world. I have juxtaposed a map of GDP density. Basically, it shows where most of the money is being made in the world, with a composite satellite image showing nighttime lights, which I argue is a proxy for the fundamental distribution of industrial or technological infrastructure in the world. So to put it very briefly, the top map shows where the money is, the bottom image shows where the technology is. And as you can see, if you shift between those two maps, they are basically identical. The distribution of technology and the distribution of money correlate almost exactly. And I think we need to understand what it is about technology and money that makes them stick together historically and in space. Since the Industrial Revolution, we have suffered from an illusion, and here I am with my anthropological approach, okay? We have suffered from an illusion that the machine is only a matter of applying ingenuity to nature. So most of us would agree that this blueprint of James Watt's steam engine is sufficient to explain the phenomenon of the steam engine. This is what technology is. It's an ingenious idea applied to natural forces. But what I'm arguing is that the steam engines in late 18th and 19th century Britain would not really have expanded in the way they did. They would not have been, they would not have appeared at that moment in time and space if they didn't have this global context. Now, the cotton textiles that were produced by the industrial factories in Britain at that time were used to buy African slaves. There was a huge demand for the cotton textiles on the coast of West Africa. And also the slave owners in southeastern North America had a huge demand for the textiles because they needed cheap clothing with which to clothe their slaves. So as you can see, this is an image from a cotton plantation in the Americas. And of course, the slaves also picked the cotton that were used for the textiles. So in three very important ways, the expansion of British cotton industry was geared to slavery. And I don't think we can understand the Industrial Revolution in Britain without understanding the global system, the world system. And okay, let me explain this by using a very simple diagram. The central icon here, which looks like a factory, is supposed to be a representation of technology. And we have this this tendency to think that a technology is basically explained by the energy that propels it, whether it's coal as this uh, dark lump at the bottom of the diagram, or the sun, solar power, at the top. So the vertical arrows are usually what we think of as belonging to the phenomenon of technology. And we exclude, as it were, the horizontal arrows, the unequal exchange, the accumulation of embodied labor and embodied land, embodied resources that makes the technology possible. You cannot harness the energy of coal or even solar power in the modern version if you do not have the technological infrastructure to do so. And that technological infrastructure, to speak with Karl Marx, is a product of accumulation. So without the colonial trade relations that England was involved in the late 18th century, they would not have been able to invest in all this steam technology. But we somehow tend to detach technology from the global social context. And Marx himself believed that the steam engines were wonderful and they would be taken over by the global proletariat and made to serve the proletariat. So he was not skeptical about technology as such. He distinguished capital from technology. And I guess the bottom line of my argument is to suggest that technology is capital. Technology is, in fact, a form of accumulation. And we can only see it if we stop separating nature from society, the material, physical from the social, because they're really two aspects of the same phenomenon. To put it very simply, I'm all the time, I suppose it's part of my mandate in developing this field of human ecology. I try to put together nature and society in ways that we usually do not do. So if, for example, you can very well become a professor or even a Nobel laureate in economics without having even heard of thermodynamics. Now, thermodynamics obviously belongs to nature or natural science, but the economists obviously believe that they can understand the world, including probably climate change, without having a clue about nature, entropy, thermodynamics, energy, all these things that natural scientists work on. But I am arguing that in order to understand the global technomass, as I call it, in analogy with biomass, we need to understand the implications of the second law of thermodynamics, the law of entropy, for the global technomass, because it is a material, physical structure, very much the way that biomass also is. And it actually suffers from some of the same constraints. Well, one of the two important things we can conclude from thermodynamics for our global technomass is that it relies on physically unequal exchange. Now, when I talk to social scientists about unequal exchange, they have a great difficulty grasping what I mean because they think it's a normative assessment. They think I'm saying that, well, the wealthy countries get more value than they export. Now, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying in order to maintain an industrial infrastructure, as we have seen in those satellite images, we need to import more high-order matter energy than we export. It's simply a law of physics. In order to maintain technomass, we need to import a lot of high-order matter energy, and in reproducing that structure, we produce more entropy, that is disorder, low order matter energy. And for those of you who are particularly intrigued by the climate problem and why we don't seem to be getting around it, I would argue that carbon dioxide emissions and other greenhouse gas emissions are actually entropy. They are the kind of disorder generated by our fossil-fueled technomass. So that no wonder that the economists don't understand the situation, because they don't even know what thermodynamics is. But climate change is very much a product of the second law of thermodynamics in maintaining our technology. So these are that was the second aspect that of thermodynamics here, that the greenhouse gas emissions from fossil fuel technomass represent entropy. So these two implications are important to keep in mind, that it requires unequal exchange, and also that it generates entropy. Now, these two implications mean that we can understand the two major existential problems confronting humankind today. One is the question of unequal exchange. Why is the world getting more and more unequal? Why do, like Jason Hickel recently argued, why do 8 individuals have as much money as the poorest half of humanity? These figures are getting more and more obscene for every year, but we know basically the trend. Okay, so why do we have these enormous global inequalities, and why are they expanding? And the second issue is we have a climate disaster coming up, and why are we not able to do anything about it? And I'm arguing that this has to do with our way of thinking about technology as completely separate from thermodynamics. And the people who approach it from natural science perspective, on the other hand, have very few ideas about the world system, about core and periphery, about the economic aspect. We shouldn't forget about that. It's the way we juxtapose social and natural arguments that makes it possible to understand what's going on. I'm going to rush through my pictures. I just want to show you that it's possible to demonstrate that even today, okay, these figures are from 2007, but what they show is that the 3 wealthiest areas of the world system, the European Union, sorry, I'm going to make a break here. There's somebody trying to get into this seminar from the waiting room. Could somebody let them in? I get this sign all the time, admit. Okay, that's your problem. Okay, so the European Union, Japan, and the US are all net importers of 4 fundamental biophysical resources. These diagrams show, the gray column shows imports, the black column shows exports, and the white column shows the difference between them, that is net imports. And you can see that for all these 3 regions, and in terms of all these 4 metrics, raw materials, energy, land, and labor, there is a net import to these centers. In other words, in biophysical terms, if we look at world trade, not in terms of money prices, but in terms of the biophysical substance of the commodities that are traded, there is a continuous appropriation of resources to the wealthy areas. This is something the economists do not see. They do not care about it. I recently bought a 1,000-page book by Paul Krugman and some co-author on economics, and it has a 40-page index with 2 columns on each page. And I looked for the word unequal exchange. It wasn't there in the index. So that tells you something about how little the economists care about the unequal flows of embodied energy, embodied land, embodied materials, and so on. They are exclusively interested in how the market operates, market equilibrium, mechanisms of prices and demand, and so on. Okay, I'll move on. What we can see very clearly is that when technology helps us to save time, because we might argue that that's one of the most important functions of technology, to save us time. like a car or so on. It means losing time for others. And this is an argument that Ivan Illich argued already 50 years ago. You may remember that. Well, you don't remember because most of you seem very young, but exactly 50 years ago, we had a huge conference in Stockholm called the Stockholm Conference, the first United Nations conference on environment and development. And it's amazing for me, I'm approaching 68 now, to see that in these 50 years, we have not learned anything. We are not any more sustainable or anything, or fair or anything compared to 1972. All the problems that were with us then have just grown worse and worse. So obviously there's something basically wrong in the way we think about these things. Well, anyway, Ivan Illich in the early 70s argued that, for example, the real speed of a car is much, much lower than we think it is. Because if you divide the time that the average person spends on his or her car over a year with the distance that it travels, you get a real speed of about 5 miles an hour, 6 miles an hour, which is really revealing and interesting. So we wonder, what do we have cars for? It's about the speed of a bicycle. Anyway, we are able to fool ourselves about our technology and the extent to which it actually saves our time or doesn't. But the question is, how are we then able to fool others on the other side of the planet? When we go to a supermarket to buy commodities made in Asia, we trade our European hours of labor for many more hours that have been spent on our sports shoes or our mobile phones or something else in Asia. So there is a constant unequal exchange of embodied labor time in the commodities produced in China and consumed in Sweden, right? But to that, we should add that when the commodities that we buy are technical artifacts, whose purpose is precisely to save their owners time, the unequal exchange of time becomes even more pronounced. In other words, if we buy stuff made in China to save European time, and those things are being made with cheap Chinese labor, the inequalities are even more apparent. Okay, so this is the topic of my book. Finally, I get to my book, Kannibalernas maskerad, Cannibal Masquerade. We consume the life energy of others. And of course, it's a metaphor, but I think it's an important metaphor because you could argue that civilizations in the past have always been about appropriating other people's life energy, whether through slavery, imperialism, colonialism. Somebody's got their mic on, or some other strategy like that. So basically, I'm arguing that our world, which looks so neutral in terms of technological progress and economic development, it may be just as insidious in its consequences as any previous civilization, perhaps even more so. I think it could be argued that no previous civilizations in the history of humankind has had such enormous global inequalities, and no previous civilization has threatened the existence of the global biosphere to the extent that ours has done. And whether we continue to consider that simply an index of progress, growth, or whatever, or whether we are able to see it as a fundamental misunderstanding of our situation, that's the big issue for our survival, I think. Well, I think the magic of technology, and that's actually the title of my new Routledge book, The Magic of Technology. The subtitle is The Machine as a Transformation of Slavery. The magic of technology would not be possible without the alchemy of the market. When you think about it, here again is an idea that to us seems completely self-evident. Of course, we could use our money. Of course, we could go to the supermarket and buy whatever we want. What's the problem? You know, it's obvious. Like all cultural truths are obvious, and only a madman would question them, right? But think about it. We have developed a self-evident system for exploiting these women in a sweatshop in Asia, perhaps exchanging one of our hours for 6 or 7 or 8 of their hours. And we think this is natural. The economists can explain it. It's all about economic growth, right? No problem at all. We do not think this is strange. I think it's very strange that 1 hour of European time is converted into several hours of embodied labor in the global South. I cannot accept that this is a natural condition for humankind. Now, then we come to the question of technology. I mean, we're in the midst now of transitioning to electric cars, solar panels, high-speed trains, windmills, all these new fantastic machines to make us sustainable. And then my question, of course, which a lot of people, especially my Marxist friends, don't like, is that I ask, can we really expect to avoid climate disaster by investing in green technology? And as I said, we do need to rethink what modern technology is from a global perspective. It is not just a matter of human ingenuity, but also of asymmetric international resource flows made possible by differences in the global market prices of labor and other resources. And the green technologies that we pride ourselves with in the wealthy parts of the world often displace environmental problems rather than solve them. And we have seen several examples in recent years. Some years back, we were all supposed to have biofuels in our cars. But then we realized it wasn't such a very good idea. It was based on Brazilian sugarcane, inexpensive Brazilian labor. It devastated Brazilian biodiversity, and also it displaced a lot of food production, which made prices soar in several countries. So that was not a good idea. Now we're into electric cars, and we do have a lot of people promoting it, but we realize at the same time that the production of an electric car gives rise to more carbon dioxide emissions than the production of a regular car. I'm not saying I like fossil fuels. Please don't believe that. I'm just saying that technological solutions are not the final solution to the problem. We know that these electric cars, even if they save some carbon dioxide emissions after some years of use, they do require a very unequal global system. You need to have cobalt extracted from somewhere. At this moment, a lot of it is being extracted in Congo by child labor and so on. And we know that the conditions for extracting rare earth minerals in the peripheries of China are not the very best, neither for the labor or for the environment. And we know, for example, and this was very meticulously studied by a former PhD student of mine, Andreas Roos, who wrote his thesis on solar panels in Germany imported from China. And it's I mean, the German transition to solar power would have been quite impossible without the low-wage labor and the fossil energy spent in China to produce those panels. So what we're seeing is that technologies that seem very sustainable from a national, local, European perspective, from a global perspective, still rely on the same global inequalities and the same unsustainable practices that we see in our current world. So my question over and over again is, have we really understood what technology is? It's not simply the politically neutral result of uncovering facts of nature, but it is dependent on global social relations of exchange. In a physical sense, it's a product of the metabolism of world society. So this word social metabolism is very important, To think in terms of social metabolism is to transcend the Cartesian dichotomy of society versus nature, because social, of course, is social, and metabolism refers to energy and physical nature. So the word social metabolism brings these perspectives together in a way that economists never do. Solving the problem of climate change is not just a question of replacing one energy technology with another, but requires transforming the economic world order. Transforming the world economy finally requires transforming money. And I realize my time is more than up, but I just want to say that we could at some point decide to redesign money. If you want to know more about this, please consult some of my texts. I can only spend 30 seconds on it.
You can spend a few more minutes if you want.
Oh, thank you, Esther. Okay. Okay. So being an anthropologist, I have sort of learned this concept of all-purpose money. It seems like money, the way we're used to it, is a very special cultural phenomenon. It's the phenomenon that everything can be exchanged for everything else. And this was unthinkable about 200 years ago. But now it has become as unquestionable to most people as water is to fish, as the saying goes. We are used to exchanging almost anything for money. And that means we're always looking for the best deals, right? When we go shopping, most of us will look for the best prices. And that means we will be asking for the commodities that are produced with the lowest wages and the least concerns about the natural environment. This is simply a logical consequence of the way money is designed. And of course, this in turn generates what we euphemistically call globalization. We're seeing a lot of capital moving to the global south, exploiting low-wage labor and lax environmental legislation to produce commodities that sell well in the global north. All this is a consequence of the way money is designed. Now, if this is the capitalist system, a lot of my Marxist friends, they finish by saying, well, it's capitalism. We have to get rid of capitalism. But to me, that's like pulling down a curtain for your eyes, because we have to understand what is capitalism. I don't believe it's a question of ownership of the means of production and, all the standard classical Marxist rhetoric. No, it's capitalism is the aggregate logic of all-purpose money. Capitalism is what happens when you have all-purpose money. And this is something that is very much in agreement with the rather obscure discourse within social science recently on actor network theory and the agency of artifacts. You may have heard these crazy ideas of Bruno Latour and so on. But obviously, if we skip the word agency, money does intervene in our lives. Money affects social and ecological relations. This artifact, this construct of the human mind actually shapes us. And we have to gain mastery over this artifact, which has become master over us. That's the political challenge, not a revolution, not to designate an evil class of capitalists, but to realize that we're all part of this enormous global game called the economy, the world market, and we're using money without thinking about the consequences it has on the other side of the planet. So very briefly, if we introduce a complementary currency alongside regular money that is distributed as a universal basic income, but that can only be used to buy locally produced goods and services, and I know there are lots of things to discuss there. Locally means produced within a given radius from the point of purchase. This would create a genuine spanner in the wheel of globalization. It would give households incentives to consume locally and generate demand for local production while decreasing demand for global transports, which are, as we know, a major source of greenhouse gas emission. Such a reform would also increase local diversity, resilience, and community integration. I think that was the briefest presentation I've ever done of my suggestion for an economic reform. Anyway, we did get very nice research grant just the other month from Formas called Special Purpose Money for Sustainability. And we're a global network now with people in Brazil, Italy, Britain, Sweden, and so on, working precisely on how to design another kind of money to increase sustainability. So it's really exciting to talk with these people. This is my final slide. I'm quoting my old friend Arturo Escobar, who wrote a book called Designs for the Pluriverse. Most of you who are in natural science will find it completely illegible because Arturo Escobar is one of these Latourians, you know. But he has one good point, and it is, he says, we design our world, and our world designs us back. In other words, we human beings, we modern human beings, are very much products of money. We're product of the artifacts that we have designed, that humans have designed, but that actually design us back. And this is, for me, quite interesting because as an anthropologist, I've been working a lot with indigenous peoples. And the late anthropologist Marshall Salins, who turned 90 actually, said something about, he was very experienced in terms of indigenous people. And then he said that the common denominator of all these indigenous groups is that they talk about the white man's living in the way of money. So the absence of money to many of these indigenous peoples at least 50 years ago, to them, the absence of money was a way to define the indigenous, the non-modern. So money, the artifact of money, may have been what generated modernity and produced the modern world and the modern human. There's a lot to be said about that. But I think the important thing is that politics should be about how we design our artifacts. That is what should be discussed in the House of Parliament, not, you know, all kinds of other things that they're talking about now. Okay, I'm going to quit there. Oh, that's 40 minutes. I'm sorry, Esther. That's twice as much as the 20 I was allotted by Toya, I think. Okay.
Thank you so much, Alf. And I think we all really enjoyed listening to you. So thank you very much for this talk. I think we should open up the floor to anyone who has questions. There are some comments in the chat too. But yeah, let's start. Isaac, go ahead, please.
Thanks, Alf, for, as always, a thought-provoking lecture. It's always fun to see what you've been up to of late. I appreciate it, especially, well, the quote that you ended on, actually. So I think I'll pick up from there, but also that you mentioned Ivan Illich's work, which I've been revisiting now, 50 years later, that he wrote the essays on energy and equity, which I highly recommend, which I think you indirectly referenced in terms of the, you know, the optimal technology being the bike. But also the social construction of energy is also an interesting essay where he tried to distinguish between energy as the E in an equation of a physicist and energy as we understand it, or as it has become to be understood in our societies and used for various political purposes.
Exactly.
I guess following up on that and Arturo's quote, I would be curious to hear your thoughts on actually going back to the idea of thermodynamics and sort of the history around that. And I guess, correct me if I'm wrong, but this was Carnot and Lord Kelvin and others that started thinking in these terms. And I don't think that it's, before that time, before the 1800s, I think it would have been quite absurd to most cultures and most people around the world to equate, you know, a ox drawing a carriage with water falling over a cliff with putting coal into a furnace and burning it. I think there's something in that comparison that is interesting to think about in terms of the concepts that we use and that we take for granted, going back to your introduction, Nestor, also, these sort of unquestioned beliefs. One of those, I would argue, would be the concept of energy and how it's become to be understood, that it's just a given, that it's something that is good and we need more of it. It has environmental implications, but also that it's shaping our way of relating to the world and the landscapes that we result in. I think Larry Lohman has expressed it as we're living in Carnot landscapes in terms of that energy. Besides money, of course, also being very influential, energy also shapes the way in which our environments have developed and continue to develop. So just a question in terms of, because I know you use thermodynamics a lot in your work, Alf, but have you sort of also reflected upon the implications of using thermodynamics as a sort of, in the way that you do, but also I think, because this goes into sort of the idea of a world system, which I've also started to criticize more and more and think about critically in terms of the sort of cybernetic implications of thinking about, that we have a whole system that we have to control in some ways. So I guess that's kind of many thoughts, but yeah, anything that you have to say on that would be interesting.
Yes, Isaac, thank you very much. That's a great question. And I just recently wrote a piece on exactly following up on Ivan Illich's notion of energy as a concept, not just as a physical entity, but as a construct. I think everything goes back to Hermann von Helmholtz, one of these German physicists who helped to develop the modern notion of energy. And he actually coined the word Arbeitskraft in German, which became fundamental to Karl Marx. And so the interesting thing is that what Hermann von Helmholtz saw, it was a very instrumentalist kind of worldview where production was at the center of everybody's mind. Now, the question was, if nature could work and the human body could work, right? And the human is part of nature, and energy became sort of the link between natural forces and human labor. So before economy and ecology split into two separate realms, they had a very common basis in energy. And in fact, the concept of energy in physics is very much modeled on the economist concept of work. And vice versa, the economist concepts of utility, the neoclassical economy, is modeled on the physicist concept of energy. So there's a kind of a mutual, reciprocal interaction between these two disciplines. Economics and physics develop in tandem. So it's very strange now that they should be so far apart, because they really were very close. And one example of the kinds of problems that appeared in this cleavage is when the physician Sergei Podolinsky, a Ukrainian, actually, a physician, contacted Karl Marx in 1881, I think, and suggested to him that the Marxian theory of surplus value could actually be understood in thermodynamic terms. It was energy. And we haven't seen Marx's response, but we have seen Friedrich Engels' response, because he wrote a letter that still is around. And he suggested that Podolinsky got it all wrong. And modern economists, modern Marxists like John Bellamy Foster and Paul Burkett, they say Engels was all right and Podolinsky was all wrong. Whereas others like Juan Martinez Allier argue that this was a missed opportunity for Marxism. Marxism could have started thinking about energy in the 1880s, and it would have completely changed the development of Marxist theory. So there's a lot of interesting interaction between economics. Can I just add one point that struck me? You may be familiar with the basic Marxist formula for understanding capitalism. MCM1, right? Money converted into commodities is converted into more money, money prime, MCM1. Now, I'm arguing that using Illich's argument on energy, you could actually say that the workers of the global north have a complementary formula, which goes EME1. Energy converted into, energy converted into money, that is the wages they get, which they convert into more energy, the embodied energy in the commodities. So I would argue that the labor energy that's spent by an industrial worker in the global north is converted to ever more energy, of course, imported from the global south. But these two cycles, the MC-M1 and the EME1, actually are interlocking cogwheels. They are not contradictory. They complement each other. And that's why one of the reasons I don't believe in a revolution, because I do believe that the proletariat, so to speak, of the global north are very much in alliance with capital, because these two cycles are so connected. Sorry for being long-winded there. Okay.
Great, thank you so much. I think one, besides sort of wishing that everyone just takes on all your ideas, I think having all politicians take a course in human ecology would help with this,
Wow.
with this split.
Wow.
I don't see the prospects of that happening, but I think combining these different disciplines is probably necessary, right, for us to move ahead. Anyway, Erik has had his hand raised for a long time, so go ahead, please.
Yeah, thank you very much for this speech. I was a little bit late, but some 10 years ago, I read your book, Myten om maskinen. And now when I hear you, I want to reread it, really. That's some 12 years ago or something. And I just wanted to know if I can reread it, and have you changed your mind in any
well, okay. Hopefully, it has developed a little bit since then. But yeah. I must admit that it's very much the same argument. But yeah. I have found various new ways of expressing it and thinking about it. So hopefully, this version is more convincing, more persuasive. So yes, please go ahead and read it.
I was convinced already then, but okay, I can reread it.
Yeah, you'll be even more convinced, I think. Yeah. No, but there are some quite additional chapters also. There's a chapter on the Anthropocene, which is not, I mean, there's some parts of the argument. There's a chapter on the pandemic. There's a chapter on degrowth. There's a chapter on green technology, and none of these topics were really touched on in the myth of the machine, myten om maskinen. So I think you'll find a lot of new stuff, actually. And there's no text that is reproduced, I promise you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Per Ribbing, I think you've made a comment in the chat. Would you like to share with us what you are writing and thinking?
Yes, please. Do you hear me? I'm trying to get my here. By making this parallel to energy, I think we are actually helping the energy lobby. Energy lobby has been providing newspeak about energy crisis and energy shortage, and everything with energy is a problem, when in fact we are living in an abundance of clean and renewable solar energy. This solar energy can be turned into highest exergy, highest quality of energy, which is electricity. In a positive way, I call it we import exergy. And exergy is what we need to clean up the system, to decrease the entropy, the disorder of the system. So we should not equate problems with using more energy. We should look at how to clean up our system in a sustainable way. And we can do that. I wouldn't call it simple. I just say it's possible because we have this enormous surplus of clean and green renewable electricity from solar energy. So just producing electricity from wind or hydro or solar cells or biogas or something, that doesn't cut it. It has also need to be used in a way to to create the sustainable society, which is published by Carl-Henrik Robert and Göran Broman. You know, Alf, I think that you know about the natural step.
Oh, yes, I do. I know Robert as well. Do you have a question for me, Per? Do you have some?
Yeah, I think you should not. When I've listened to you all this speech, and yes, we do have problems with people saying that all green energy is good. And I say we need to see the parameter exergy instead, because it's only with the imported exergy that we can clean up, that we can lower the entropy of the system.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. As you will find in my books, I've been using the word exergy for about 30 years, and I realized that exergy is the right word to use here. Exergy is the capacity of energy to conduct work. It's what's, you could call it, available energy. And I realized that I used the word energy a bit sloppily because other people will otherwise think that I've simply misspelled energy when I put an X there instead of an N. So I try to avoid spending time explaining that, but you're absolutely right. Exergy is the kind of energy that can be used. Now, about your discussion of solar energy, I would certainly not agree with you, because I don't think it's as easy as that, you know, there's plenty of solar energy, so let's just harness it. Because the technology for, as I explained before, the technology for harnessing solar exergy requires a social process of exchange. That's why Germany needed China in order to create renewable energy. And if it was so simple as you're suggesting, I'm wondering why Cuba still a few years ago used 95% of its energy use came from fossil fuels. Now, why did Cuba do that? They don't have any fossil fuels. They have lots of sun. If it was just a matter of harnessing the sun, why didn't Cuba do it? You know, I'm really wondering, I think this is where the misunderstanding of technology is maximal. The wealthiest countries in the world are starting to invest in some solar power, but it's simply the wealthiest countries. If it was as simple as you're saying, why don't all the poor countries in the world, in Africa, South America, and so on, immediately start putting up all those solar panels? I'm saying there's a social dimension to this that engineers usually miss. Okay.
Okay, thank you, both of you, Per, for your question and Alf for your answer. I don't see any hands, so I might take the chance to ask a question myself, but please raise your hands if anyone wants to add anything. I was wondering, because what you're suggesting is so against the mainstream ideas in our sort of industrialized consumer societies. What is your view on the sort of the possibility to get people in general and policymakers in particular to understand and accept these thoughts? Do we have any chance of succeeding?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question, and I will immediately admit that I am not as naive as many people think. I don't believe that these suggestions I have will be, at least not in the near future, be discussed seriously among either economists or politicians. but I still think I have this one life, and I've had this opportunity to develop human ecology and a pretty unique transdisciplinary perspective. And I believe that this is all I can do, to be intellectually honest. And I guess I try to console myself by suggesting that we need some kind of, we need to be prepared for the major catastrophes that inevitably will strike us in the future, whether ecological or political or social. And I'm hoping that at some point in the future, there will be the realization that we're just playing this game until death. We're playing ourselves until extinction, but we can change the rules anytime. But it's so hard to change those rules because we think they're written in stone. But I do agree that it seems very unlikely that anybody will take this seriously. It's about as unlikely as somebody, imagine a political party. I mean, we're having elections in Sweden in a few months' time. Imagine a politician who would stand up and say, we need to reduce our consumption of energy and resources in this country by about 80%. Now, how many votes do you think this person would get? Okay, so democracy seems somehow incompatible with sustainability. And realizing how absolutely hilarious it seems to try to get anybody to accept these ideas, I think I might as well do it, because it's not less realistic than surviving a climate catastrophe or a nuclear war or anything else. It's not less realistic than getting a global revolution or having everybody drive electric cars in Burkina Faso and so on. These ideas about sustainability and global justice are, to me, much less realistic than what I'm talking about. And yet they are what are propelling this global system and the politics of today and the global market and the visions for technology that we're all struggling with. No, to be very brief, I don't believe these ideas will be taken up for a very long time.
Yeah, and by the time we have to take them up, it might be too late. But
That's
yeah,
true. That's true.
We'll see what happens.
True.
Toya, I think you raised your hands, and I don't know if Per and Erik, if your hands are still raised or if you just haven't unraised them. But Toya, go ahead for now.
Yes, thank you so much for this presentation. It's been amazing listening to you, and I can't wait till I have my hands on that book. I'm thinking, well, we had this discussion in Researcher's Desk the other day about hope. Some want to bring hope about, and some people think that we run out of hope. I mean, hope is out. It's out of fashion. And I think I know what you're going to say about this. But anyway, I'm going to raise the question since you're so wise. Would you think at this point of time it's a good thing to come up with all the green so-called solutions to this, rather than explaining exactly how bad the situation is? For me, it's definitely where we have to start. We have to understand how bad the situation is and not jump over the step, any step, to find the hope in true action or to act on the severity of the problem. So where do you think, how much hope should we add into the dialogue on climate crisis and ecological crisis?
Yeah, that's a very important question. I finished the book Kannibalernas Maskerad with a few sentences about hope, where I suggest that when we moved from pre-modern times to modern times, we sort of had to get rid of the notion of heaven, of an afterlife, of life after death. And instead we assumed this story about progress. And both of these stories were ways of fitting our own lives into a larger context. Our own lives became meaningful either in relation to heaven in pre-modern times, or in relation to the progress of civilization, which was like the whole 19th and 20th centuries almost. And now, with the prospect of climate change, we have lost progress. How many of us actually believe, like Steven Pinker and Hans Rosling did, that we're moving towards better and better life? So I think we're in an existential situation that is reminiscent of when people lost religion. And we don't know what's going to come after that. Perhaps some kind of resurgence for spirituality to replace the notion of progress. I'm not sure. I think all of us will want definitely to strengthen our care for our closest relations. And that may be the big signifying moment of this time. But to answer your question about the usefulness of constructing green technologies, I can't say yes or no, because I do believe that all of us need to have a sense of doing something important, something meaningful, and it's very difficult to take those ideas away from economists or engineers. So I think it would be very cruel to tell a lot of people that you just better stop whatever you're doing because it's not going to help us anyway. And I'm thinking more in historical and global terms. I mean, this is not the first civilization that's faced with a terminal crisis. The Roman Empire, for example, is familiar to all of you. It crashed in 476. And I sometimes wonder if you were living, say, in the year 350, and you had been studying a lot of what was going on and realizing that things were getting difficult. The environment was being degraded, slaves were becoming more and more expensive, the wars were being too expensive. What would you have done? What would we have done if we had been living then? Would we have given up our hope and said, no, we better start preparing for the Middle Ages? Or would we have said that Rome is the eternal city? And I think there's something existential about this, how we continue to believe in our civilization until something comes up which shows us that it's no longer possible to believe in it. And that may happen. I thought it would happen when the pandemic started 2.5 years ago. And I was wringing my hands saying, finally, finally. And then, of course, we managed that as well. And I'll be probably be proven wrong more times before the final crisis comes. But I realize I'm sounding like a very melancholy doomsayer, but it's part of my job. Okay.
I think we have reasons to share those feelings.
Okay.
So it's 1:04. Alf, I don't know how much time you have. There are, I think, there's one more question. Do you have time to take that one? Or do you have to go?
Sure, no problem. And I want to thank all of you who have sent very nice chat messages to me. Thank you. I've enjoyed meeting you all. Okay, who had the question?
So Eric, let's say that you have the last question, or actually I have a slight problem, which is that I have a meeting with my supervisors. I'm going to have to go, but Alf, if you have time, and Toya, you have time, maybe you can continue without me. But I have to go after this question.
Okay.
Eric.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, you said that you don't believe in revolution. I've also read some books by Andreas Malm, and as I understand that you work together, and yep. So I'm just curious, why do you have such different views on the revolution, or what you mean by revolution when you say that you don't believe in revolution?
Yeah, sure. I'll happily respond to that. Yes, Andreas Malm was my doctoral student, and I'm extremely proud of all the great things he's written and done, and he's internationally well known for his work. He's a leading climate activist. But I don't agree with him about certain things. I don't agree with him that we should blow up pipelines. I don't think that's a very nice way of dealing with the problem, because it's going to hurt a lot of innocent people. I don't believe in his standard classical Marxist understanding of technology as being a product of class interaction in beginning in, say, industrial Britain. I believe it has to do, I believe that what Marx celebrated, the rising productivity of British workers in England in the 19th century, actually occurred at the expense of the global periphery, of slaves and others in the global periphery. And if Marx would ever have assimilated that global insight on technology, I'm sure his notion on revolution would have been very, very different. And I don't believe that the culprits are people. I don't believe, like I said before, that we have an evil class of capitalists that we need to get rid of, and then things will be okay. Because I think the culprit is an artifact, like I said, and we need to transform that artifact rather than start shooting people or putting them in jail or whatever. These are some of the reasons, but I have a very strong respect for Andreas, for his position and his commitment and his capacity and his productivity. But I don't agree with him about the basic Marxist interpretation of where we are.
Is it a question rather about the methods, and you agree on the goals, or?
No, basically, it's about what we've been talking about here, about how to view technology. I don't believe technology is a solution. I believe technology is very much about displacing problems and displacing them to others. And that's why I don't believe in direct air capture or carbon capture and storage or even electric cars or anything else that's being bounded around now as solutions to the climate problem.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Erik, and thank you, Alf, again for all your answers and your time. I think if nobody objects, we should end now, unless anyone has anything else to say. But otherwise, thank you again to everyone. Thank you so much for your time, Alf Hornborg, and thank you for thank you for coming and for listening, everyone. I hope we can get you back so we can continue this discussion. So
thank you very much. Thank you, Esther.
Let's talk again.
Okay.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye-bye, everybody. Thank you all.
Bye, everyone.